Alright, welcome to another video, everybody. It has been a little bit since I've recorded, but I wanted to just do a quick one here today just to show you how to make your own recordings, just like I'm doing for my channel here. And you can, do them on your own computer. So the first thing is I'll use a free software. It's called OBS Studio. If you're in Linux, you can just pull that right up here on Linux Mint. I've got the software manager here. And it's available right within that. If you go in there, you can see, and you just type up here in the search box, type in OBS. You might have to type in actual OBS Studio, and you can see it here. Now there's two different versions in the software manager here. If you click on them, you can see and scroll down a little bit here. This one is what's known as a flat pack. It's a separate kind of installation file for Linux, and with those, some software only is available in a flat pack, in which case, at that point, that's kind of your only option. But the one downside to using a flat pack versus a regular one, you can see here the size here. It's 1.3 gigabytes to download and 2.9 gigabytes of disk space required. Now that's huge for a single piece of software that's not, something too crazy. So if you can check back here, you can see this little check mark. That means this is the one that I already have installed on my machine. This is the one that I did instead, the OBS-Studio. And if you click in that, it's the same software. It's just the difference is this is not the flat pack version. And you can see size is only 16.3 megabytes of disk space. So it says freed, but that's because I already have it installed. But it's drastically smaller than the flat pack as far as how much space it'll take up on your computer. So I would recommend just the regular one if you can get that to work, unless you have problems with it, or like I said, some software will only come as a flat pack on Linux, and then in that case, that's just how it is. You've got that version to work with. And the other thing to double check too is also the version numbers. In some cases, one or the other will be pretty far behind. If you want the latest and greatest, you're always going to want to go to their actual website. And if you're not on Linux, obviously, like if you're on Windows or whatever, then that's how you're going to get it. Just, go to your search engine, type in OBS Studio, and then, get to their website, download it from there. But if you don't, the nice thing about with Linux with the software manager, it's just a convenient way to set things up. It's just, you go in here, you type it, there it is. It's already, ready to go. So you just hit install and you're done. So once you've got that installed, I've got it loaded up here. And there are just some settings that I like to do personally. I'm not an expert at this. I just am, the average person. And I set things up certain ways just for my own preferences, but you're free to modify the settings, to suit your needs, of course. So what I like to do to first start off is down in the sources section here. I like to use two different kinds of sources. You can see one here, screen capture, and it's XSHM. I'm not really sure what that is, other than it's just signifying the way that it does the screen capture. And so that's one that I like to use. That's the one that I'm using currently. And what that will do is it will record what's on your computer screen, no matter what. So if you switch windows, if to different programs and software and stuff, or if you just go to the desktop, and it will just keep recording. But the other one that you want to use sometimes, if you only want to focus on, say, a specific window or a specific piece of software, you go down here, you can go to this little plus button that says add, you click on that. And the other major one that I like to use is this one here. It's called window capture. It uses Xcomposite, I guess. And here's a whole list, though. There's all kinds of different things you could choose if you'd like, as well as the screen capture one here. You can see that's how I added that as well. You just click there. So you just go ahead and do the window capture, and then it'll say, create new, and I just leave that by itself. Make source visible, yes, and then just hit OK. And then here it will say, this is if you're going to capture right away. It will say, like, what window do you want to capture? So this is the difference, is that you can say, specifically capture just the OBS window, or just the desktop, or just this text file I have open over here. So that's the main difference with window capture, is if you just want to capture a single source that, just like, say you have something open and you want to, like, Photoshop or whatever, and you're you're, doing a tutorial video for that, or you want to record, your process or whatever, you can just select that from the window capture. And to do that later on, it does it at the start there, but all you have to do is just double click on it, and then it will bring up this prompt again, and then you can say, okay, select, the OBS window, and then you can see it says, oh, this is the window you want to record from, okay, or oh no, just select the desktop, or whatever, and then you would just hit okay after that. There's some other settings down here you can do as well. If you scroll down, I like, depending on what you're recording, whether you want to capture the cursor or not. When I'm doing screen capture like this, I like to capture the cursor, but when I'm doing window recording, I like to not, because usually I'll record something, that I don't want the mouse cursor to show up. But if you do want the mouse cursor to show up, you could just leave that checked, and that's fine. And there's some other settings here you can play around with at your, convenience and leisure. But generally speaking, that's pretty much how that goes. So those are the two that I mainly use, screen capture and window capture. So once those are set up, I'll actually go into the settings. Is usually the next thing. And you can change the theme right here. So it starts with like a dark theme that looks like, let's see if it does it. Yeah, it looks kind of like that. I'm not a huge fan of dark theme stuff myself, so I set it to system to match my system theme, which is lighter, and so that's why it looks like this. There's a whole bunch of settings in here that you can modify to your liking, but I'm just going to go over the ones that I like to use personally. So I already set them, but I'll just go do a quick overview. So on the output here, most of the time I do not do streaming, I just do recording, and that's because my internet is not good enough to stream. It's really old and slow. So, but even so, I still like to set a few things in here just to be extra sure. I make sure the encoder is at x264. The output rescale, I don't rescale it. I just leave it at the default. Depending on your hardware, you may need to, rescale it down. Like if I'm recording on my laptop, it's older. It can't really do, the higher resolution stuff as well. So sometimes I'll scale it down to make it a little bit easier on the video, processor in the laptop and stuff like that. But it'll just depend on your situation. I change rate control to VBR. It starts at CBR. The difference between is constant bitrate and variable bitrate. And pretty much what that, I'm not an expert on it, so I'm not going to be able to give you a really good definition there, but I find that variable makes it a little bit easier for the quality to stay pretty good without the file size getting crazy out of hand. I think the default bitrate is like something around 2500, but I bumped that up a little bit to 3000. This is going to heavily depend on your internet connection and what it can handle. The higher the bitrate, the more the file size is going to end up being, and the harder it's going to be for your your connection and your hardware and everything to keep up with that. But but the quality will be better the higher up it goes too. So I just usually set that. I don't really know for the streaming settings what the best settings are. So and I just leave everything else at its default for there. But more importantly, for my purposes, and if you're just recording videos rather than worrying about streaming so much, I go over here to the recording tab. And I keep the recording format as MKV. That's fine. You could change that if you want. There's a drop down. Right now it's not going to let me change it because it's in the middle of recording, but you could change it if you'd like. And but I leave it at default. Now here on the audio track, I like to select two separate audio tracks like this. By default, there's just the one. But if you check the second box, and the reason I do that is because sometimes I will be recording something where I will want the audio from my computer speakers to be recorded, but also I want my commentary, if I'm talking, to be recorded too. And when you do two separate audio tracks like this, I'll show you in just a little bit, you can actually separate them out onto their own audio track. So I leave the encoder at x264. Rescale output, again, I don't mess with this on my system. I just leave it at its default. I leave that where it is. Again, I changed the rate control to VBR. For the bitrate, I actually bumped this up a little higher to 4000. The one that I set in the streaming doesn't really matter, like I said, because I can't stream anyway, even if I wanted to. But I would say if you were doing streaming, you probably would want to match them pretty close, like whatever. But you can, for the recordings, you can make them a higher bitrate potentially. because you can stream a slightly less quality video, but the one you want to record, you want to make that pretty high, if you can. See, with mine, I set it at about 4,000. That seems to be kind of a sweet spot for my hardware. This is going to just depend on your resolution of your video and what your hardware is capable of handling. I find that if I set this too much higher than 4,000, OBS starts throwing errors and things about, going over its available buffer for video memory and stuff like that. So for me, 4,000 seems to be the sweet spot. It's not incredibly high quality. Like, it would be better if I could get to like 6 or 8,000 or something like that. But, my hardware just doesn't seem to be able to do it. So, smoothly. But it comes out in a pretty good quality at around 4,000. Again, this is just going to depend on what you have on your system and what it's capable of doing smoothly without causing any issues or anything like that. So those are the main ones that I set, that I change. And then again, with the audio here, I leave the rest of this stuff alone for the most part. Leave it on very fast for the CPU usage. If you do have some errors, it will complain about this and it'll say, try setting this to, a different setting. But, and you can, there's a whole bunch of options you can choose from besides that one, when you get in there and, click on it. Again, right now it's not going to let me because it's in the middle of recording, but it's okay. But if you do need to go in there, that's where you would change that. Is, change that up or down or however you need to do it. So it stops giving you errors. And the next one I go over to is this audio tab here. Now these audio tracks, they all start at audio bitrate of 160, which for most people that's probably okay. Just me personally, I like to bump that up a little bit higher to 192. And that's just because mainly for the, like, if there's any music or anything playing in the recordings or things like that, I want it to come out a little bit nicer. Like, I feel, just to my ears, like 192 is like a good minimum level to where music doesn't start sounding like weird and too glitchy or digitized or whatever. But at 160, I can kind of notice a little bit of a difference. So, but you could bump that up, much higher than that if you'd like to. It's up to you. I just like to do it still at a low amount so it doesn't take up a ton of space or whatever. Add too much bulk to the recording file size and all that, but also at an audio level that to my ears is still pretty good. So I just switch all those, and you just click here. It'll start at 160, and it'll give you a bunch of presets. Like, I think 192 is the next one up, and then you can go to 256 and whatever else if you want to. So that's where all those are, and I don't mess with anything in the replay buffer tab. Down here in the audio section. Here, it just says default normally, and you can leave it at default. I just have it specifically pointing to my devices in general so that it doesn't accidentally, mess with anything or get the wrong one. So I have one here, desktop audio. So this is my audio output for my speakers. And then it says mic auxiliary. This is the type of microphone that I have on my computer. The sample rate I leave at 48, and, everything else. Channels of stereo, all that, I just leave it alone. I don't mess with any of these. Again, I'm not an expert at this stuff. I'm sure people that really know what they're doing, like a lot more than I do, could tell you, oh yeah, fine tune it with this, but the decay rate and the, peak meter types, I don't even know what those are, to be honest. So I leave most of the stuff at default, and that seems to work pretty well for my needs. And then in here in the video, this is where it says video output is currently active. Please turn off any outputs to change the video settings. Again, because I'm recording, it's not going to let me change this. But here is where you would change the output of your recording if you need to. So, like for example, on my laptop, if I was going to record this, say at whatever 1080p, it wouldn't be able to handle that good. So I would change the scaled output resolution down to say 720p or something like that. And you can just do that, as much as you need. You can even change the base resolution of your recording if you need to. Usually I just leave that one set to whatever my monitor's, my desktop monitor's resolution is, or, the laptop resolution, whatever. And then I just change the output one as needed if I need to lower it down to something smaller. The downscale filter, I leave that at the default. Same with, but with most of these settings, But you can change that if you'd like. It mostly just applies to when you're scaling down to a lower resolution. So instead of, if this was 1280 by 720 to be 720p, then this would come into play of, okay, how does it scale the image down to a smaller? And I again, I'm not an expert, and I have difficulty noticing a huge difference between this default setting and like the next one over, above that. So I just leave it at the default. Now this, common FPS values. So by default, this is set to something, I believe it's like, it tries to do 60 frames per second when it can. And then it, otherwise it falls back to 30. And this is, again, just going to depend on your hardware and your device that you've got going. For my particular setup, I find 30 frames per second is fine. Most of the time when you're just recording something on your desktop anyways, you're not even going to notice that. Unless you're trying to do like with gaming or something like that. And even then, I mean, yeah, there's a difference. You'll notice between 60 and 30 if they're side by side, but most of the time I'd still just say 30 is fine for my purposes. But that's, again, a setting you'll want to set for your own needs and, whatever your hardware is capable of recording. So that's pretty much it. One other thing I forgot to mention in here. By default, when you go into the output, this output mode will say basic, and you want to change it to advanced so you can see all these settings. That's one thing I wanted to mention before I forgot about that. Otherwise, not all these options may show up like that. So, but the rest you won't need to do that. It's just for the output tab here. But with that, that's pretty much all the settings that I do in the settings window here. So I just go ahead and hit OK, and it will apply all those recording settings. And now one other thing, like I was talking about before about the audio, if you go either into in this audio mixer section here. You can see there's two lines. So the mic aux line here, this is for my microphone, and you can see as I talk, it's kind of showing that there's noise, that it's picking up the sound of my voice as I'm talking. And then this one, is for your desktop audio, so this will be your computer speakers, and if you have something, music or whatever going with that, you will, it will show up there just like the mic one is showing up right now as I'm talking. But what I do, either with this one or this one, it doesn't matter, but you just click this one of these gear icons here, and you go to this advanced audio properties section here. And now you can see, so this is just the two different tracks, the two different devices that you have for your audio. One's a microphone and your speakers. So right now it is like there's nothing I need to mess with, but if you can see this bar here, the scroll bar, if you move it all the way over to the right, and you can see there's this track section. Now, by default, every single one of these checkboxes is checked. So what I do is I set one specific unique track just for the desktop audio, and one other unique track, the second track in this case, for the mic. And what that does is that separates out, and you can do it the other way. You can make mic the first channel and, the desktop audio the second one, and that would be fine. But by putting them on separate audio tracks like this, you'll recall in the settings back here, under audio setting, or not the audio settings, but the recording settings. I check the boxes for track 1 and track 2. So you can have more tracks if you need to. But from there, you can just go from there to there, and then that will make it so you have desktop audio on one track, microphone on another track, and then from that, you will be able to edit it as needed separately from one another. So you can have just your voice speaking if you need to make it louder, or, fix some corrections on your voice stuff. Maybe you stuttered, or you had a pause or whatever. You need to do your audio editing. You can have that be on its own separate track, and that will allow you to do that much easier without having to worry about messing with whatever was recording on your desktop. So, and that's pretty much it. From there, you're all set. You just hit the start recording button over here, and you should be all set up to start recording your own videos. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.